받고 있습니다. 대만에서도 판권 요청이 왔고, 그리고 이제 또 중국, 태국, 일본에서도 관심을 가지고 지금 판권 문의가 와서 진행 중이라고 알고 있습니다. 무엇보다 예, 작품이기도 해서 스페인에서 많은 독자들의 관심과 사랑을 받으면 더 좋겠습니다. 돈키호테를 패러디한 책이기 때문에 돈키호테를 잘 이해하는 영미유럽권 독자분들도 재밌게 읽으실 수 있는 작품이 아닐까 합니다. 독자에게 들었던 얘기 중 가장 기억에 남는 이야기가 있을까요? 자기 친구에게 이 책을 선물하고 싶다고 하면서 친구에게 위로가 될 말을 한마디 책에 써달라고 부탁하시는 분들이 많았습니다. 제 책이 그렇게 어려운 시기를 보내는 친구에게 선물로 줄 수 있을 정도의 가치가 있는 책이라는 것에 가장 큰 감동을 제가 받았습니다. 책을 읽고 터졌다는 이 불편한 편의점 마지막에 기차가 다리를 건넜다, 눈물이 멈췄다 라는 문장으로 끝이 나는데 책 속 주인공은 눈물이 멈췄는데 자신은 그때부터 눈물이 터졌다는 리뷰를 남기셨습니다. 마음속으로 감동의 눈물을 흘리지 않았나 합니다. 독자들이 어떤 작가로 기억되고 싶으신가요? 작가로서의 저보다는 제 작품들을 더 기억해 주길 바라는 마음이에요. 그래서 이렇게 나를 어떤 식으로 정의하겠다는 질문이 좀 어려운 것 같긴 합니다. 그래도 답을 드리자면 예, 이렇게 하고 싶습니다. 함께 대화를 나눈 독자들에게 전해줄 마지막 메시지. 독자 여러분들과 이렇게 채팅으로 만나게 됐는데요. 세계를 다니면서 만났던 이 여러 나라의 독자 여러분들 얼굴이 떠올랐습니다. 이렇게라도 오늘 저희가 채팅을 통해 좋은 대화를 나눈 것 같고요. 제 책들, 제 이야기들 앞으로도 더욱 많이 사랑해 주시기 바랍니다. 이산호 소설가 김호연이었습니다.
Arirang TV is conducting an overseas TV viewer survey to provide you with a better global broadcast service. Share your valuable feedback on the Arirang TV website www.arirang.com or mobile application. Survey participants will be selected at random to receive special gifts. 2025 Arirang Overseas TV Viewer Survey. We look forward to hearing from you.
In our headlines on this Thursday, June 19th, here in South Korea. A second supplementary budget plan for this year and the first under the Lee Jae-myung administration is poised to make its way to the National Assembly next week amid efforts to revive the economy. Meanwhile, over in the US, Donald Trump says he's holding off a final decision on possible US involvement in the escalating violence between Israel and Iran over the latter's nuclear weapons ambitions. And the US Federal Reserve is holding its benchmark interest rate steady for the fourth session in a row, with Chairman Jerome Powell pointing to rampant uncertainty over US tariffs on imports. The Lee Jae-myung administration is looking to loosen the government's purse strings to breathe fresh life into the local economy. Accordingly, an extra budget plan has been hammered out and will be sent soon to the National Assembly. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
The second round of a supplementary budget bill this year, the first of its kind under Lee Jae-myung's presidency, has been drafted and is set to go to the National Assembly next week. President Lee, presiding over a cabinet meeting on Thursday, took a final look.
작년 12월 3일 이후로 심리적 위축이 심해서 있던 손님도 얼마 안 되던 손님도 다 떨어져 나갔다고 현장에서 너무 어려워합니다. 다행히 최근에는 조금 분위기가 개선되고 있긴 한데 어쨌든 본질적으로 우리 서민들이 겪는 고통이 매우 큰 것 같아요. 국가 재정을 이제 사용할 때가 됐습니다.
The size of this supplementary budget is 30.5 trillion Korean won, or a bit more than 22 billion US dollars. 15.2 trillion of that will be going into boosting the economy through stimulus. 5 trillion will be going to stabilizing people's livelihoods. 10.3 will be for revenue adjustment for the nation's fiscal situation. This means 20.2 trillion will be for direct spending by the government, with 19.8 trillion being debt. Going into the details, 15.2 trillion for economic stimulus will consist of 10.3 trillion of that being relief to everyone in a different form of the recipient's choosing. 1 trillion will go into boosting discounts and other needed aspects. 2.7 will go into support for the construction sector, as it's currently one of the hardest hit industries with close links to the employment of working-class citizens. President Lee has been pushing for cash relief to everyone for some time now since his lawmaker days. But then conservative government have been saying a universal payout is not right due to the financial pressure on the nation's fiscal status, and selective support is better.
만약 이제 일반 원칙으로요. 만약에 우리가 어떤 제도를 시행하는데 필요한 경비다 이게라고 하면 그 경비 지출에 따라서 혜택을 보는 반사적 이익을 보는 사람은 누구여야 하느냐? 그건 가난한 사람이어야 하느냐? 아니면 세금을 많이 내는 부자여야 하느냐? 저는 어떤 필요에 의해서 경비를 지출한다고 하면 그 반사적 혜택은 최소한 국민들이 공평하게 혜택을 누리는 게 맞다고 생각해요.
The draft did go with a universal payout, but for those who need it, the more they will receive. The top 10%, approximately 5.12 million people, will receive a one-time payment of 150,000 Korean won, or around $100 US. And the biggest group of citizens, of around 43 million people, will receive the first payment of 150,000 Korean won, but will get an additional 100,000 in the second round. The lower levels will receive more in first-time payments, with the social welfare recipients later getting 500,000 in total. As for stabilizing livelihoods, money will be spent on debt relief for small businesses, as well as boosting employment and taming inflation. Now the ball is in the National Assembly's court, with the government's draft being transferred on the 23rd. Lawmakers will be reviewing the bill, but with the ruling Democratic Party holding the majority on the floor, the bill won't face many obstacles. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The number of one-person households stands at an all-time high of 8 million here in South Korea, and among them, over 5 million are employed, the highest proportion since related data collection began 10 years ago. This latest finding is part of a report by Statistics Korea on the employment status of one-person and dual-income households during the latter half of last year. And speaking of that, dual-income married households fell to some 6 million, and among the working parents, those with children under 18 accounted for over 58%, the highest on record. U.S. President Donald Trump is delaying his decision on U.S. involvement in the military confrontation between Israel and Iran. Our Moon Hye-ryun explains.
7 days into Israel's military campaign against Iranian nuclear and missile facilities, cross-border attacks are escalating. On Thursday morning local time, an Iranian missile struck Israel's main southern hospital, causing what officials described as extensive damage. This came as Israel targeted a heavy water reactor southwest of the Iranian capital, with Iranian state media reporting that the facility had been evacuated ahead of the strike and that no civilian areas were affected. Israel had issued a warning earlier in the day, stating its intention to strike the site and urging residents to evacuate. The latest air assaults come amid uncertainty over possible U.S. involvement in the conflict. Speaking to reporters at the White House on Wednesday local time, U.S. President Donald Trump said that he had yet to make a final call and he would hold off doing so for now.
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final. I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change. I mean, especially with war. Things change with war. It can go from one extreme to the other.
Shortly afterwards, he convened a second White House Situation Room meeting in as many days to discuss the agenda with his national security advisors. The talks lasted for around an hour, and it is not yet clear what was discussed or whether any decisions were made. According to the Wall Street Journal, Trump told senior aides late Tuesday that he had approved plans for a potential military strike on Iran, but decided to pause, hoping Tehran might still give up its nuclear program. Earlier in the day, Trump claimed that Iran had proposed to come to the White House to begin negotiations and once again called for unconditional surrender. In response, Iran's diplomatic mission to the United Nations in New York hit back on social media by saying that no Iranian official has asked to grovel at the gates of the White House, followed by a message from Iran's supreme leader himself.
The Iranian nation stands firm against the imposed war, as it has stood so far, and stands firm against the imposed peace. The Iranian nation will not surrender to anyone in the face of imposition.
As tensions intensify, nations are moving to evacuate their own nationals from Israel. The U.S. State Department has started pulling out non-essential diplomats and is arranging evacuation flights and ships for American citizens, while China is also working to evacuate its citizens. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, recent remarks by the head of the U.S. Defense Department are reigniting concerns about U.S. commitment to security partnerships with its allies, including those here on the Korean Peninsula. Our Lee Seung-jae has details.
U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said there will be a new standard for defense spending for Asian and other U.S. allies, as the Pentagon chief reiterated U.S. President Donald Trump's call for NATO members to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP. Speaking to the Senate Armed Services Committee on Wednesday, Hegseth stressed that the U.S. cannot want the allies' security more than they do. He also said NATO heads must commit to spending 5% of GDP on defense at the NATO Heads of State meeting next week. The comments from the Pentagon chief come amid speculation that Trump might raise South Korea's defense spending or its share of the cost of stationing U.S. forces Korea. Currently, South Korea's defense spending stands at around 2.5% of its GDP. Meanwhile, during a forum hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies on Wednesday, U.S. Senator Andy Kim said that the current administration's reported consideration to decrease USFK presence in South Korea is a perfect way to derail the Seoul-Washington relationship, especially at a critically important moment for the alliance. The Korean-American senator also stressed that failing to treat U.S. allies and partners differently from adversaries is a huge mistake, adding they will cause unnecessary friction. At the same forum, former Deputy Secretary of State during the Joe Biden administration, Kurt Campbell, warned that any substantial adjustments to the USFK troop level could be misinterpreted as a sign of reduced security commitment from Washington. Campbell warned that any steps that would lower the troop presence in South Korea could lead to a crisis in confidence. The Wall Street Journal last month reported that the Pentagon was considering the idea of withdrawing some 4,500 USFK troops to other locations in the Indo-Pacific to better calibrate U.S. force posture in Korea to deter China. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And for the fourth session in a row, the U.S. Federal Reserve is holding its benchmark interest rate steady, citing uncertainty over the broader repercussions of the Trump administration's tariff campaign. Our Moon Ji-young covers this latest decision.
The U.S. Federal Reserve kept its key rate unchanged for the fourth straight meeting Wednesday and lowered the country's economic growth outlook. This keeps the rate in the 4.25 to 4.5% range and marks the fourth consecutive rate freeze since Trump took office, despite pressure to make cuts.
What we're waiting for to reduce rates is to understand what will happen with really the tariff inflation. And there's a lot of uncertainty about that.
So far, inflation has remained relatively tame near the Fed's target of 2%. However, economists warn it may take months for the effects of tariff to be felt. Inflation has also seen recent upward pressure from rising oil prices driven by the conflict between Israel and Iran. However, Fed officials still foresee 2 interest rate cuts by the end of this year, the same as they projected in March. The central bank's latest quarterly projections show noticeably weaker growth, higher inflation, and slightly higher unemployment by the end of this year than it had forecast in March. For this year, Fed officials expect inflation to rise to 3%, unemployment to increase to 4.5%, and growth to slow to 1.4%. The Fed also projects GDP to grow by 1.4% in 2025, down from 1.7% projected in March.
Following growth of 2.5% last year, GDP was reported to have edged down in the first quarter, reflecting swings in net exports that were driven by businesses bringing in imports ahead of potential tariffs.
President Donald Trump has publicly criticized Powell for not cutting rates, increasing pressure on the central bank. But the Fed chairman dismissed criticism, saying, quote, "We are in a good place." Meanwhile, this week's decision puts the benchmark rate gap between South Korea and the U.S. at up to 2 percentage points, with the Bank of Korea slashing its key rate to 2.5% at its last meeting in May. On the same day, Bank of Korea Deputy Governor Park Jong-woo noted the Fed chairman's cautious policy approach, influenced by U.S. tariff policy and divergent views among officials. Speaking at a meeting on macroeconomic issues, he also highlighted the growing uncertainty regarding the future path of U.S. monetary policy. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
The U.S. is resuming its visa applications for foreign scholars, but now requires full access to their social media accounts for comprehensive vetting procedures. Our Iuni reports.
The U.S. State Department is resuming the process for foreign nationals applying for student visas following a temporary suspension last month. But according to a statement released Wednesday, applicants will now be required to provide information about their social media profiles. All applicants will be asked to set the privacy settings on all their social media profiles to public. New guidance directs U.S. diplomats to look for any indications of hostility toward the citizens, culture, government, institutions, or founding principles of the United States. Failure to comply may be seen as an attempt to evade screening or as an effort to conceal online activity. This policy applies to students and other applicants for visas in the F, M, and J categories, which refer to academic and vocational education as well as cultural exchanges. The temporary pause in visa interview scheduling last month was prompted by the U.S. evaluating new social media vetting procedures, leaving students worldwide anxious. The New York Times commented that the guidelines' vague parameters will no doubt create much uncertainty among American universities and students and scholars overseas who intend to travel to the United States. It also wrote that critics say such a process and other related actions by Secretary of State Marco Rubio are aimed at limiting free speech, enforcing certain beliefs, and pressuring foreign citizens to censor themselves and refrain from criticizing the Trump administration. Meanwhile, according to a senior State Department official, the Trump administration is working to make America safer, acting on citizen expectations, and that Marco Rubio was helping to make America and its universities safer while bringing the State Department into the 21st century. Iunhee, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, young overseas Koreans are taking part in a special program here aimed at offering them the opportunity to delve into their roots. Our An Sung-jin files this report.
7.5 million. That's how many overseas Koreans there are. Gathered here are around 240 next-generation overseas Koreans aged 15 to 18. This teen camp, hosted by the Overseas Korean Agency and organized by the Overseas Koreans Cooperation Center, has participants from 26 countries.
For these students, by visiting their parents' country, they can really feel their Korean heritage. Our ultimate goal is to increase the budget for such programs so we can invite more participants.
Especially as 2025 is the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation, these students are delving into learning about their history and roots.
Programs like these offer the opportunity for overseas Koreans to experience Korea's history, culture, and society while helping them build connection with younger people in the country.
For some, the 7-day program starts with a visit to Seodaemun Prison History Hall, which gives them a chance to understand Japan's colonial era and reflect on their background. For 15-year-old Sophia, this was an opportunity to fulfill her interests and ties with her Korean roots.
My grandmother was born in Korea, but it so happened that they were deported in train cars to Kazakhstan. Just in the cold, they were thrown like that. They started working at coal mines, and life began to improve for them. It's my first time in Korea, but I really like it here, and I will definitely come again in the future and maybe study here.
And at the National Museum of Korean Contemporary History, students look back at the country's past to strengthen ties and raise awareness of their Korean identity.
I know one of my great-grandfathers on my grandmother's side was a war veteran after the knock-on for the Korean military. I feel like it shows a lot of courage, and that courage is often seen throughout my family, I believe. That's one of the main reasons why I've come to Korea.
This program for the summer will run until August, not only for teens, but also for those aged up to 24 as well, to foster overseas Koreans as global leaders who embrace and uphold their Korean heritage. An Song-jin, Arirang News.
On the cultural front, South Korea is expanding its presence in the world of ballet, led by local talent and global recognition. Our Cha Yun-kyung has more.
Last fall, famous Korean ballet troupes performed the ballet La Bayadere with renowned dancers including ballerino Jeon Min-chul. Ticket sales last year saw a dramatic increase due to famous works and performances. The total ticket sales in the first 3 quarters of 2024 exceeded 6 billion Korean won, around $4.4 million, which is the highest in 5 years. And with this growth, world-famous ballet companies and choreographers are visiting Korea. The American Ballet Theater performed in Korea last month, showing the history of American ballet. Lady of the Camellias, which brought an award to Korean National Ballet director Kang Soo-jin in 1999, also returned to the stage at the beginning of this month. And choreographer John Neumeier has come to Korea to collaborate for this work. Living legends of Korean ballet such as Choi Tae-ji and Kim Joo-won will come out in the 15th Ballet Festival Korea, which will be held until the end of June. The Seoul Metropolitan Ballet has also collaborated with famous Swedish choreographer John Inger for this festival. Inger has visited Korea for the first time as a choreographer for this project. As Korean ballet dancers are seeing global acknowledgment, world-famous masters are also heading to Korea. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. Huaiji County in China's Guangdong province is facing a once-in-a-century flooding and mass evacuations after heavy rainfall caused by Typhoon Wu-tip caused the Suijiang River to burst its banks. As of around 7 a.m. on Wednesday, the Huaiji Hydrometric Station recorded a peak river level at its highest ever recorded, some 5.22 meters above the warning threshold. Along the river, 7.8 kilometers of levees have been breached. Flooding has hit 19 towns, affecting around 300,000 residents, with more than 68,000 evacuated. Over half the county's roads are submerged, power and internet are down in many areas, and schools and businesses remain closed. More than 10,000 rescuers have been deployed to evacuate stranded residents. In Indonesia, dozens of flights have been canceled or delayed after Mount Leotobi Laki-Laki erupted on Tuesday. The The volcano on Flores Island erupted at around 5:35 p.m. local time, sending a massive ash cloud over 10 kilometers into the sky, visible up to 150 kilometers away. Authorities have raised the alert to the highest level 4. The ash cloud prompted the cancellation and delay of flights to and from Bali's International Airport. The airport in Flores also closed temporarily. Several villages near the volcano were evacuated. While no injuries have been reported, ash is falling on homes and roads and is contaminating water supplies. According to experts, ash clouds pose serious risks to jet engines and could linger depending on wind. They also cautioned about potential lava flows and mudslides if rain follows. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is facing growing criticism at home after saying on Tuesday that Israel is doing the West's dirty work by striking Iran's nuclear facilities. Speaking on the sidelines of the G7 summit, Merz praised Israel's actions as courageous, saying he has the greatest respect for its military campaign against Iran. The comments have stirred backlash among German lawmakers and human rights advocates. Critics argue Merz is normalizing targeted strikes that bypass international diplomacy and risk violating international law. However, Merz defended his stance, saying he stands by his remarks, though he declined to address criticisms directly. On Fano Island off Denmark's southwestern coast, more than 5,000 kite enthusiasts from over 26 countries are taking part in the 40th anniversary of the island's International Kite Festival. Fano Island is uniquely positioned for the festival, with its 16-kilometer length, 3-kilometer width, and reliable winds making it ideal for kite flying. The festival runs from June 19th to 22nd, and family-friendly events, including workshops and demonstrations, will be offered. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Ahead of the rainy season, the heat has become stronger. The lowest temperature in Gangneung last night was 26.5 degrees, the first tropical night of the year. The daytime temperature in Seoul rose up to 33 degrees. Wonju, Cheongju, and Gyeongju 34 degrees with humid conditions. Today and tomorrow, the whole country will gradually enter the rainy season. Heavy rain of up to 150 millimeters is expected in northern parts of Gyeonggi-do Province, Gangwon-do Province, Chungcheongnam-do Province, and Jeollabuk-do Province. Please be prepared in advance. Tomorrow morning will start warm at around 22 to 23 degrees all over the country. Daily highs will move up to 25 degrees in Seoul, Chuncheon, and Busan, 29 degrees in Daegu. Rain in the central parts of the country will gradually stop on Saturday morning, but it will continue in southern parts of the country and Jeju Island until Sunday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session. Do stay with us, and thank you for now.
birthright.
한국을 대표하는 먹거리 하면 뭐가 먼저 떠오르시나요?
김치입니다.
안녕하세요. 저는 베트남에서 온 옥안입니다. 김치는 한국인의 밥상에 빠지지 않고 올라오는 먹거리인데요. 그런데 가끔 김치에 대해 잘못 알고 있는 분들이 있더라고요. 그래서 제가 오늘 김치에 대한 바른 정보를 알려드리려고 해요. 김치는 한국의 전통 발효 식품인데요. 한국에서 가장 많이 접하는 김치는 배추김치예요. 고춧가루, 마늘, 젓갈 등 다양한 양념을 넣어 버무려 발효시키면 맛있는 김치가 탄생합니다.
와, 맛있겠다. 선생님, 김치 종류가 엄청나게 많다고 들었어요.
네.
어떤 게 있어요?
김치는 배추김치를 한국 사람들은 제일 많이 먹긴 해요. 뭐 깍두기, 총각김치, 무로 만든 김치가 있고 갓김치, 파김치, 부추김치, 그리고 오이소박이, 열무김치 이런 식으로 모든 채소가 다 김치를 담글 수가 있어요. 김치의 세계는 무궁무진해요. 그래서 김치의 맛은 전국에 어머니 숫자만큼 있었어요. 집집마다 맛이 다 달랐기 때문에 김치가 맵기만 한 줄 알지만 꼭 그렇지 않아요. 고춧가루 들어가지 않은 백김치도 있고요. 물김치도 있고 과일김치도 있어요. 그리고 요즘은 해외에서 김치를 많이 찾고 있어요. 먹어보고 간 좀 봐요.
너무 맛있어요.
네, 맛있어요.
한국어로 알리기 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
There have been a number of large-scale anti-Trump rallies over in the U.S. in recent days, and on Press Perspective today, we touch upon these protests, including their intentions and broader implications. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Thursday, June 19th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today we turn our attention to public protests over in the U.S. following our own fair share of demonstrations after our short-lived martial law late last year. Now for more on this, I have Rui Valdez with Spanish news agency EFE Spain here in the studio. Rui, as always, welcome back.
Nice to be here.
I also have Jessica Stone, an independent journalist over in the U.S. joining us virtually. Jessica, thank you so much for making time to join us live.
Good evening.
Right, Jessica, LA, it has recently become the epicenter, if you will, of tensions with the Trump administration over deportation plans. Let's begin with a timeline of the public protests in LA. What started them, and are people still taking to the streets there?
Well, just on Tuesday, we had Karen Bass, the mayor there, decide to end the curfew that she had implemented back on June 10th when the riots really began to escalate. This all goes back to June 7th and through 10th, it goes back to June 6th after a series of these immigration raids throughout Southern California, which sort of whipped up a backlash of people who said, we need to protest these. These are not right. These are not constitutional. And they went to the government buildings, and you're seeing that in the video there. And that just began to build and build, and some of it get out of hand. At this point, there have been 500 arrests made in connection with these protests after vandalism and of government buildings covering about a 21 square kilometer part of Los Angeles. So it's important to note that this is not a wide scale set of protests that was occurring in Los Angeles. At this point, most of it is no longer occurring. But again, this is a small part of LA, the downtown part of LA, a 21 square kilometer part of this city of immigrants reacting to these mass immigration raids in Southern California.
Right, and speaking about those raids, Jessica, broadly speaking, are these raids on with regard to farms, hotels and restaurants? There was a bit of confusion about whether the ICE raids were also going to target them.
Yes, we call that whiplash, and it's not uncommon with this administration and the direction from the president by social media. So at one point, he had reacted over the weekend to the idea that this was really hurting farmers and major farm operations, hurting hospitality industries, because 14% of undocumented workers are in construction and farming, 7% are in hospitality, and there was a mass reaction from these businesses. By Monday, that had switched back to the immigration raids are on. Coming from the direction of the Homeland Security Department via the Twitter account that they have, where they said there will be no safe spaces for industries who harbor violent criminals or purposely try to undermine ICE's efforts, ICE being the Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement part of the Department of Homeland Security. And I should add, Border Patrol has released 0 undocumented immigrants into the U.S. in May. This was another evidence that they are providing to talk about how there's a contrast between this administration and the Biden administration, saying that they are not releasing the immigrants that they pick up during these raids, whereas the previous administration did.
Jessica, with regard to the public protests, what can you tell us about the demographics of the demonstrators? I mean, who are the people partaking in the LA protests?
Well, I think this is very interesting and important to point out, because Los Angeles is a city of immigrants, not just Hispanic immigrants, but Asian immigrants, Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians. In fact, out of the 3.9 million people who live there, more than 35% are foreign born. So this is a really visceral, emotional issue. And I should point out, too, that 1 out of 5 Los Angeles children live with an undocumented family member or an undocumented parent, or they are undocumented themselves. So this is very real, very visceral, very personal to many of the people of Los Angeles. They're also overwhelmingly young. Most of them are under the age of 40, and they don't necessarily, I should point out as well that they don't all fit the profile, in this case, of those who are arrested. The people who are arrested, many of them, police say, are professional rioters. So I don't want to indicate or implicate that the people of Los Angeles are among those arrested, but it does point out that so many of the protests, the reaction to this policy, really, really personal to the people of LA.
Right. Rui, for the sake of clarity, let's expand on something that Jessica touched upon. How many undocumented immigrants are there in the U.S., and what makes the U.S. such a desired destination?
Yes, as of mid-2023, around 13.7 million of undocumented immigrants were registered or counted in living in the U.S. This represents 27% of all the country's foreign-born population. It's interesting that lately, since 2019, this figure has increased dramatically, perhaps because of Venezuelan immigration increased a lot, and another type of undocumented immigrants that were seeking for asylum. There's shifting origins of these immigrants. Before, Mexicans were largely the undocumented immigrant population, but now, in the last 10 years, only 19% are Mexican, and if you integrate Central America and South America, those will be the majority over the last 10 years. Many Central Americans are fleeing gang violence, insecurity, and fragile economies, and looking in the U.S. like a better standard of life. There's also a new profile of unauthorized entry. Before, still most part of it, but before there was a large quantity of immigrants that crossed through Mexico, walking or through buses in a very dangerous manner. Now it has shifted a lot, that they have seen that many undocumented immigrants are overstayed tourists that have student visa or working visa that decide to stay in the country. And some, like I mentioned, are looking for asylum or amnesty. Another very important point is that most undocumented immigrants are long settled. Nearly half of all foreign-born individuals have lived in the U.S. for more than 20 years. This means that whenever these ICE raids are being made, they're separating or deporting people that have very well-established lives in U.S. And just to put things in perspective, why it's important, or why immigrants want to migrate to the U.S., we can start in remittances to put these things in perspective. In Mexico, remittances reached $62.5 billion in 2024. That's equal to 3.7% of Mexico's GDP. In Guatemala and Haiti, they represent 19%, and in Nicaragua and Honduras, up to 26%. Mentioning Venezuela, some estimates say 35% of households there depends on remittances to live. So this is basically the landscape of undocumented immigration.
Right. Rui, do you suppose the Trump administration's immigration policies have perhaps affected or changed Mexican migrants' perception of the U.S.?
Yes. I will start with something, then I will connect it. Just to, and again, to put things in perspective, in terms of numbers, Trump is still far behind what Obama, the numbers Obama deported. This number, it's official, but most people don't know about it, or many people don't know about it. Why? Because what we see with Trump is that he bets a lot on optics and narrative. This doesn't mean that he's not deporting thousands of undocumented immigrants, but what it means is that in terms of the narrative, how are they pointing that these undocumented immigrants are mostly criminals, or they're promoting some ads of the government that show these images, putting undocumented immigrants, especially Mexicans, under a very dark light. These are the things that differentiate Trump with other administration. Also, Biden, in the last year of his administration, he deported more people than what Trump has deported so far. Just to put it in numbers, Trump, the latest number made by Trump's border czar is that around 200,000 people have been deported over 4 months. Biden, in the last month, was 257,000. Being that said, this doesn't mean this is not significant. Why? Let's say the rhetoric that is being used, it's affecting not only the undocumented immigrants, it's also affecting Hispanics that are already citizens or have permission to live in the U.S. They feel threatened. Why? Because they feel that they could be stopped arbitrarily by ICE authorities, or simply that the narrative of the government is putting them as second-class citizens. So what we believe is that all this together has sparked this massive protest, that you have the undocumented immigrants suffering from these raids, being separated from their families. They were supposed to be deporting undocumented immigrants with criminal records, which is not necessarily happening in all the cases. And you have the citizens who have Hispanic roots, or maybe relatives that are undocumented immigrants that feel threatened and go out now to the streets to protest against this. As they were mentioning, the images that we see in TV and pictures is only in localized areas of the protest. Doesn't mean that this is happening in a generalized fashion. So yeah.
Right, which is something that Jessica was saying as well. Rui, there have been reports that say immigrants contribute tangibly to the U.S. economy. Could you put that into some perspective for us?
Yeah, according to a study from American University, immigrants contribute an estimated $2 trillion annually to the U.S. economy, nearly 8% of national GDP, and more than the entire GDP of Canada in 2022. This includes documented and undocumented immigrants. But in the study, they've mentioned that $81 billion were sent in 2022, mostly to Latin America and the Caribbean, which, as I mentioned, most of the undocumented immigrants belong to those regions. They also clarify that they didn't include white-collar immigrants because these people usually have the possibility to integrate or to invite their own relatives to live, and they are not the common senders of remittances. So basically, what the conclusion of this study is that the U.S. economy benefits largely from the work of immigrants, documented and undocumented, and it makes a case study for El Salvador, which population largely are of undocumented immigrants. It says that in 2023 alone, Salvadoran immigrants and their U.S.-born children contributed $223 billion, or about 1% of total U.S. GDP. That's an incredible figure considering the size of El Salvador, which is a very small country.
Right, indeed. Jessica, beyond the public protests against ICE raids over in LA, that is, there were rallies in other parts of the U.S. this past weekend that drew millions, with the slogan being "No Kings." Could you tell us about these particular rallies and their related repercussions?
Well, these were a coordinated effort by the No Kings Coalition, which is a progressive activist coalition that basically was creating an opportunity for Americans across the country to have a sort of release valve to express all of their disenchantment with the current policies of this administration. And of course, Trump has his great fans, his great loyalists, but he also has his great detractors, and this was really an opportunity for them to show up across the country. They showed up in major cities, but also in small towns, protesting particularly the immigration policy of this administration, as well as what's perceived as an expansion of presidential powers. The MAGA wing, or the presidential defense of that, is that they're taking back power from the legislature and the courts that they believe should be rightly in the White House. The counter argument by the people, especially those who protested this past weekend, was that they're taking too much power. This is concentrating power in the hands of a more autocratic, dictator-like presidency, and that's where that title of No Kings comes from.
Right, and with regard to the LA protests, Rui, I understand this also prompted quite a bit of a diplomatic dispute, if you will, between Mexico and the U.S. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem accused Mexico President Claudia Sheinbaum of fueling violent protests in LA. This was after Mexican president said the following, and I'll quote, "We make a respectful but firm call to the U.S. authorities to carry out all immigration procedures in accordance with due process in a framework of respect for human dignity and the rule of law." This accusation made by Homeland Security Secretary was done in the Oval Office in front of Donald Trump, and quickly the next day, Mexican President Sheinbaum said that it was absolutely false, and posted a video of the full statements where she included a clear message where she condemned the violence and disruption in LA protests, disqualifying the use of violence or creating disturbance in these protests. Still, this created tensions because President Sheinbaum is in a difficult position right now, where you have this protest happening in LA and a lot of Mexican citizens involved either in the protestings or in the raids made by ICE. The difficult position here she has is that she has to show a message that she has to protect her citizens, but at the same time, these things are happening in another country, in another territory. Being that said, it was clearly an exaggeration, or not even connected what Kristi Noem said about her, and I think it's very clear in the messages that she posted in many of the social platforms. But what she has been saying, on the other hand, is asking for U.S. immigration reform to protect Mexican undocumented immigrants, especially in the sectors of agriculture, services, and manufacturing. These diplomatic tensions seem to have passed. For now, it has cooled down, but there is also a very important element happening since the beginning of the protest. If you see the videos and the pictures, especially the most sensational pictures, when you see cars on fire, you also see people holding Mexican flags. This has been interpreted in two different ways. The people that are against it, they say it's a symbol of an invasion, like a foreign invasion. The people that quote more historical background, they of course mention the large population of Mexicans that are in LA and other states in US. And they also say that the Mexican flag has been used even in the past in other protests in 1994 that were defending immigrants to get access to different social services like health and others. Still, the position of the U.S. administration still has shown some signals that they could take this Mexican symbol as an excuse to direct their, let's say, their negative discourse against specifically Mexicans, which is of high concern in Mexico, of course.
Right, for sure. Jessica, with regard to Mr. Trump's broader immigration policies, what's the latest on birthright citizenship there in the U.S.?
Well, that is the major Supreme Court decision that we are waiting for this week. We could get it as early as hours from now, when the court typically releases its decisions at 10 a.m. Local time. So that's about 6 hours from now. That is basically, there are three major decisions that we're waiting on out of the collection this week. And, you know, today being Thursday, we could get it today, we could get it tomorrow. Birthright citizenship is the constitutional backed guarantee that those who are born on U.S. soil inherently have U.S. citizenship. This goes back to 1898. It was affirmed by the courts then. But in January, Trump signed an executive order trying to end the practice. And basically, the court has to decide if the Trump policy is constitutional. There are arguments on the other side as well. But the main issue here is that the U.S. back in 1965 was 85% white, and it's expected to be a minority country by 2040. And part of the reason for that is people being born on U.S. soil who come from other countries but get citizenship by virtue of being born here. I want to just point out that the U.S. is a nation of immigrants, and so this, again, is a very personal issue to so many. Even people who have been here for generations come from an immigrant heritage. I have Russian ancestry and Swedish ancestry, and so I think it's fair to say that birthright citizenship is personal to most Americans in that way. And so there will likely be an extensive reaction depending on which way this court decision goes this week.
Right. And speaking about immigration, but coming back here to South Korea, we'll end on that note with the domestic question. Rui, quite a number of pundits here in the country have said that an active immigration policy here in South Korea could be one option to addressing the country's plunging population. What have you been hearing from the new Lee Jae-myung administration with regard to this issue?
Well, specifically from Lee Jae-myung administration, the relation or this proposal hasn't been attended as clearly, but still there's many precedents from the previous administration that it was being taken seriously. The mayor of Seoul mentioned it as a proposal to somehow make more lax, to make it more easy for immigrants to stay in the country long term, to promote the birth rate, because many of these immigrants are young and some of them are marriage immigrants as well, so they already have a partner, and they could also apply for citizenships and other things. The vice chair of the Presidential Population Committee from the previous administration urged immigration bill 3D as a core policy tool, not just as an option. All this in the context that the incredibly low birth rate of Korea was mentioned by Lee Jae-myung when he was a candidate, but still the part of how would they connect or try to solve this issue through facilitating immigration is still not clear.
Right, I see. So I suppose we'll have to wait and see then. All right, Rita, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today. And Jessica over in Washington, D.C., thank you so much for joining us live at this hour with your thoughts.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Right, and on that note, we'll end this edition of Press Perspective. Do join us again same time tomorrow.
제주특별자치도가 6차 4.3 희생자 보상금 신청을 2025년